One phone call to the Pentagon was all it took to destroy their careers and prove that injustice has no hiding place. General Alyssa Montgomery was driving through a quiet part of Louisiana, a place most people pass through on their way elsewhere. She had done this drive 100 times before. No security detail, no flashing lights, just her, a rental car, and a deadline. Alyssa had a confidential meeting at Barksdale Air Force Base and didn't have time for distractions. Somewhere between Lake Charles and Shreveport, near Mosswood, Alyssa noticed the signal bars on her secure phone dropping. She needed to make a call now. She spotted a rundown gas station, Kelly's Fuel and Food, and pulled in. It wasn't pretty, but it would do. Alyssa parked away from the front door near a few locals leaning on trucks, chatting in the heat. She grabbed her secure device, stepped out for better reception, and initiated the call. General Montgomery, verifying identity. Initiating briefing, she said, her voice calm and professional. Before we continue, we'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us get closer to 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. Thank you so much. As Alyssa focused on the call, she casually scanned the lot. People near the gas pump glanced her way, noticing she didn't look like the usual customers. She was dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, a loose jacket, and a ball cap pulled low over her hair, nothing that screamed authority. But not everyone saw it that way. Inside, Paula Sweeney, a woman in her 50s, watched Alyssa from behind the counter. Paula didn't see a decorated war hero. She saw someone suspicious. Paula picked up the phone and called Mosswood police. "We've got a suspicious woman by the pumps," she said, her voice low. "She's acting strange. Might be on something. Y'all better check it out." The officers responded with little more than eye rolls. They didn't expect much action in Mosswood, but they were eager to stir things up. They threw on their sunglasses and sped toward the station. Alyssa, still focused on the Pentagon call, had no idea trouble was on its way. Just as she reached for her next orders, flashing lights reflected off the station windows. 2 police cruisers screeched into the lot, gravel flying. Alyssa lowered her phone, squinting at the lights. Officer Marcus Hunter, mid-30s, and Officer Ethan Blake, younger and eager, jumped out of the cars. They moved like men looking for a fight. Alyssa felt the air shift. She calmly placed the phone on her car hood, keeping her hands visible. "Good afternoon, officers. How can I help you?" she asked, her voice controlled. Hunter barked, "License and registration now." Alyssa stepped forward slowly, reaching for her wallet. "Absolutely." Alyssa pulled out her military credentials and federal travel orders, extending them toward the officers. "My ID is right here. I'm active duty military. General Alyssa Montgomery. I'm on official business." Blake scoffed. "General, huh? You expecting us to believe that?" Hunter grabbed the documents, barely glancing at them before tossing them back onto the hood. "This is fake," he said, dismissing her ID like trash. Alyssa blinked, stunned. "Sir, I assure you," she started, but Blake cut her off. "Shut up. You think you can play us, lady? You picked the wrong town for that." A small crowd had gathered, some whispering, some laughing. Alyssa's SAS training told her to de-escalate, but she knew these men weren't interested in answers. They'd already decided who she was. "Please contact your supervisor. You're making a serious mistake," Alyssa tried again. But Hunter had already grabbed the cuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Alyssa stood her ground. "I am a general in the United States Army. You are unlawfully detaining me." Hunter laughed. "Yeah? And I'm the president. Now turn around." Before Alyssa could respond, Blake roughly grabbed her arm, and Hunter snapped the cuffs tightly around her wrists. Alyssa bit her lip, swallowing the humiliation rising inside her. The secure phone, still connected to the Pentagon, fell to the ground, its voice calling her name, but the officers didn't notice. Hunter shoved Alyssa against the rental car, causing a gasp from the crowd. "Got her," Blake said triumphantly. Alyssa stood there, breathing hard, staring at the dirty window of Kelly's Fuel and Food. In that moment, she wasn't a general. She wasn't even a person to them, just someone to be tossed around. Back at the Pentagon, the secure call turned alarming within seconds. Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hanley, monitoring the line, heard only static and background noise. He leaned closer. "General Montgomery, this is Command Operations. Do you copy?" No response. He glanced at his supervisor, Colonel Dana Ethan Rupp, who immediately took charge. "Ping her location," Ethan Rupp ordered. Within moments, a technician pinpointed her location at a gas station off Highway 171 in Mosswood, a small town most Pentagon staff had never heard of. Ethan Rupp's face tightened as she instructed, "Get Barksdale security on the line and patch me through to JAG. If something happens to Alyssa, we're moving immediately." Meanwhile, back in Mosswood, Alyssa sat on the curb in handcuffs, her back against the wall of the station. "What's your real name?" Blake asked, towering over her. "Who are you working for?" Alyssa X. Carter D. slowly. "You have my ID, my travel orders. Everything you need is right there." Hunter snorted. "Lady, you're about 2 seconds from being booked for obstruction. Don't push it." Alyssa stayed silent, refusing to beg. She saw people pulling out their phones, recording and whispering. Paula, the manager, stood by the door, arms crossed, smirking as if watching a spectacle. No one seemed interested in stopping it. Suddenly, Blake's radio crackled to life. "Dispatch to Unit 3, confirm you have detained subject." Hunter grabbed the radio. "Affirmative." Female, early 40s, refusing to Hunter 8. A pause. "Be advised, subject is flagged federal. Pentagon has initiated emergency contact. Release immediately and await further orders." Hunter's face drained of color. Blake's smirk vanished. "What the hell?" he muttered. Alyssa, still sitting, said nothing, just staring at them. Hunter fumbled with the keys and unlocked the cuffs without looking her in the eye. He muttered something that sounded like an apology but didn't say it properly. Alyssa stood slowly, flexing her wrists where the cuffs had dug into her skin. The crowd had fallen silent, and even Paula's smirk had slipped. Alyssa picked up her phone from the ground. The screen was cracked, connection lost, sensitive information possibly compromised. She looked at both officers. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "Not tomorrow. Not next week, today." Before Hunter could respond, a new set of flashing lights appeared. This time, it wasn't local cops. A convoy of black SUVs from Barksdale Air Force Base screeched into the parking lot. Alyssa wasn't waiting for backup. She was ready for what happened next. The SUV's doors swung open almost simultaneously. There was no glamour in the way Barksdale officers moved, just urgency. Leading the team was Lieutenant Colonel James Carter, mid-40s, Ethan Rupp, eyed and focused. He crossed the lot quickly, folder under his arm, locking eyes with Alyssa. "General Montgomery, are you injured?" Carter asked. Alyssa shook her head. "No, Colonel, minor abrasions. The bigger injury was to their careers." Hunter and Blake shifted nervously. The realization hit them too late. Other Air Force security officers closed ranks around Alyssa, positioning themselves between her and the Mosswood cops. Carter turned to the local officers. "You are hereby ordered to stand down pending federal investigation. Any further action on your part could be obstruction of justice." Hunter stammered, "We didn't know who she was." Carter responded, "That's not an excuse. You had documentation. You had everything you needed." Blake tried to justify himself. She was acting suspicious. Carter stared at him for a long moment and then said quietly, "You saw a black woman on a phone call and made a choice. That's going to follow you for the rest of your life." The Air Force team quickly escorted Alyssa into one of the SUVs, ensuring she was seated comfortably. As the convoy pulled away, Alyssa glanced back just long enough to see Hunter wiping his forehead with a trembling hand and Paula rushing inside the station like a roach under a kitchen light. Inside the vehicle, Alyssa remained silent, her gaze fixed on the endless stretch of highway as her thoughts raced faster than the SUV. After a while, Colonel Carter broke the silence. "The Pentagon's coordinating a full investigation, Mom. Internal Affairs, Civil Rights Division. It's going public whether Mosswood likes it or not." Alyssa didn't nod, smile, or flinch. "They should have known better," she said simply. Carter agreed, nodding. "They're going to find out what it feels like to be seen for who they really are." The convoy sped past fields of tall grass and leaning telephone poles. Heading toward the Air Force Base was Alyssa's authority and dignity would finally be recognized. But Alyssa knew the real battle was just beginning. And this time, the whole country would be watching. News of the incident hit national headlines before Alyssa even finished her debrief at Barksdale. Someone had posted the cell phone footage online, raw, grainy video showing 2 Mosswood cops handcuffing a woman who calmly explained she was a U.S. Army general. There was no shouting, no resistance, just the unmistakable look of someone stripped of their dignity by people blinded by arrogance. The video spread like wildfire. By morning, Mosswood was no longer just a dot on the Louisiana map. It was the center of a growing national outrage. Networks ran the story on repeat, and commentators expressed their disgust. Civil rights leaders called it a clear case of racial profiling and abuse of authority. Even veterans organizations issued statements demanding justice for General Montgomery. Back in Mosswood, the police department scrambled to control the damage. Chief Vernon Grady, more familiar with hunting deer than handling press conferences, stood before a sea of cameras, sweating under his cowboy hat. "We regret the misunderstanding," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. "The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full review." A young reporter from Baton Rouge cut him off. "Chief Grady, why were trained officers unable to recognize military credentials clearly presented to them? Was race a factor in this so-called misunderstanding?" Grady fumbled for words, muttering about high tensions and mistaken identity, but everyone watching knew the department had no real defense. Meanwhile, Hunter and Blake had gone radio silent. Their names were leaked within hours, splashed across headlines, social media, and public outrage forums. Anonymous sources revealed that both men had prior complaints for excessive force and racial profiling, which had been swept under the rug before. Not this time. Civil rights attorneys from New Orleans and Washington, D.C. filed federal complaints on Alyssa's behalf. The Department of Justice launched an independent investigation, and even the Louisiana governor spoke out, calling the incident an appalling miscarriage of justice against a national hero. It wasn't just about Alyssa anymore. It was about everyone who had been doubted, dismissed, or degraded because of a uniform they didn't wear, a color they couldn't change, or an assumption made about them. At Barksdale, Alyssa was constantly briefed, with her lawyers, Pentagon officials, and even a White House liaison calling for updates. She answered every question with the same steady voice she had used to command troops in war zones. But when she was alone in the quiet of her quarters, the weight of it pressed hard against her chest. Not because she was surprised, but because after all the medals, after all the service, after all the sacrifice, none of it had mattered in a dusty parking lot in Mosswood. Still, she hadn't spent her life running from battles, and she sure as hell wasn't about to start now. But if Alyssa was going to speak, she knew she had to do it on her terms. Not just for herself, but for every silent face watching her from the Ethan Dow's. The press conference was scheduled for noon on a Saturday outside the gates of Barksdale Air Force Base. Cameras were already lined up, microphones stacked deep. The air was thick, buzzing with the energy that meant something important was about to happen. Alyssa Montgomery stood behind the podium, wearing her full dress uniform for the first time in months. Medals gleamed against the deep blue fabric. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze unflinching. She wasn't here to entertain. She wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. Colonel Carter stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching protectively. A few senior Pentagon officials flanked him, grim-faced. They had offered Alyssa carefully worded talking points, diplomatic phrasing, a safe path through the minefield. She politely declined. When Alyssa finally spoke, her voice was clear enough to cut through every rumble of traffic, every click of camera shutters. "My name is General Alyssa Montgomery. I have spent 29 years serving this country, leading soldiers, advising presidents, defending the ideals written into the Constitution." She paused. "Yesterday in Mosswood, Louisiana, none of that mattered." She let the words hang in the air. "I was judged not by the content of my character, not by the uniform I've earned, but by the color of my skin and the assumptions made about me because of it." Reporters scribbled furiously, but Alyssa wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking to the people who had seen the video, who had felt a familiar pang in their gut, a Ethan Rupp memory of being doubted or demeaned or dismissed. "I'm not here today for an apology," she said. "I'm here because silence is not an option. Accountability matters. Respect matters. Human dignity matters. And none of these are negotiable based on someone's prejudice or someone's ignorance." Behind the cameras, members of the local community had gathered. Black families, veterans, students holding handwritten signs. Alyssa caught glimpses of their faces, some angry, some hopeful. all of them waiting for something they hadn't seen enough of lately: real leadership. Injustice is not new, Alyssa continued. But change only happens when enough people refuse to look away. She finished with no dramatic flair, no rehearsed slogan, just the truth. I was not humiliated yesterday. They were, and history will remember it that way. She stepped away from the microphone without waiting for questions. The applause started small but quickly grew into something real, something alive. As she made her way back toward the base, Alyssa moved with the same steady pace she always had, carrying more than just her own story. She knew the world wouldn't change overnight. It might not even change in her lifetime. But maybe, just maybe, it would change a little because she refused to stay quiet. 1 week later, the story of General Alyssa Montgomery's confrontation in Mosswood had become a rallying cry for change. News outlets continued to cover the fallout, and the public response was unprecedented. While some tried to downplay the incident, many others, especially in marginalized communities, found themselves inspired. The faces of the officers involved, now widely recognized, became symbols of something deeper: prejudice, ignorance, and the need for accountability in law enforcement. At the Pentagon, the internal investigation was moving forward swiftly. Alyssa's colleagues, many of whom had been unaware of the full extent of the situation, were now fully behind her. The high-ranking officers who had been silently watching, waiting for her next move, now saw a different side to the general they had once known only for her strategic brilliance. Alyssa wasn't just a leader in the field, she was now a symbol of courage, standing up for what was right no matter the cost. But Alyssa wasn't resting on her newfound fame. She had known all along that this was only the beginning. The week following the incident, she received a flurry of messages from leaders in both the military and civilian sectors. Some praised her for her poise and integrity. Others privately expressed their discomfort, knowing that her actions would lead to an inevitable reckoning within the ranks. The small town of Mosswood, which had previously been a mere speck on the map, was now the center of a national conversation. Local businesses saw an uptick in attention as people from across the country visited to learn more about the incident. The once quiet gas station where Alyssa had been detained became a site of pilgrimage for those who saw her stand as an act of defiance against systemic injustice. Alyssa had never sought the spotlight, but she knew how to wield it when it came. She quietly worked with civil rights organizations and lawmakers to ensure that the moment would not fade into obscurity. Her phone rang more than ever. But it was never the Pentagon that was calling. It was the families of those who had been wronged by the system. They wanted to hear her thoughts, her advice, her guidance. It was during one of these calls that Alyssa realized the true depth of her impact. She had become more than just a general. She was now an emblem of the fight for equality, standing up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by the weight of injustice. 6 months later, the reverberations of the Mosswood incident continued to Ethan P. the trajectory of Alyssa Montgomery's career and the future of law enforcement reform. Alyssa had transitioned from being a general on the battlefield to a leader on the front lines of social justice. Her efforts in the aftermath of the incident were relentless, pushing forward reforms that focused on police accountability, racial profiling, and a culture shift within the military and law enforcement agencies. The investigation into the officers, Hunter and Blake, had concluded. Both officers were dismissed, their actions deemed gross violations of conduct. Their careers were ruined, but the broader implications were even greater. The incident had sparked national debates about systemic racism and the deep-seated biases within police forces across the country. Alyssa's case became a catalyst for policy changes, with multiple states now reviewing their police training protocols to address issues of discrimination, bias, and abuse of power. Alyssa had also become a sought-after speaker, invited to conferences, town halls, and panels where her voice was not just heard but respected. The military's top brass recognized her influence, and she was now frequently consulted on matters of diversity and inclusion, using her experience to help Ethan P. new strategies for improving relations between the armed forces and civilian communities. But as much as Alyssa had gained professionally, personally, things were not as simple. The emotional toll of that day in Mosswood still lingered. The loss of dignity in front of the crowd, the degradation by officers who hadn't seen her as a person first, still haunted her. She had learned to compartmentalize the anger and humiliation, channeling it into her work, but the scars were there, invisible but persistent. In the quiet moments, Alyssa would reflect on the larger picture, what this fight meant beyond her. Her name had become a symbol for change, a beacon of hope for those who had felt the weight of prejudice. But in her heart, she knew that true change wouldn't come easily. The system was deep, entrenched in centuries of habits and injustices, and while progress had been made, it was only the beginning. Alyssa's work continued, but with it came a heightened awareness of the battle still to be fought. The fight against systemic racism was far from over, and she would keep pushing, keep advocating, and keep challenging the status quo. The road ahead was long, but with each step forward, Alyssa knew she was closer to the world she envisioned, a world where justice was not just a word, but a reality for all. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.